Tonight, you return once more to the quiet world of Detective Blackwood, where even the most carefully guarded places may conceal something that does not wish to be seen. It began, as many of his cases did, with something that did not immediately demand attention. The letter arrived in the early hours of the morning, placed among ordinary correspondence without distinction. There was no mark to suggest urgency, no indication that it differed from the others that passed through his hands each day. And yet, once opened, it resisted the quiet dismissal that such letters often received. It contained no greeting, no name, no attempt at persuasion or explanation, only a single measured statement. A theft would take place. It would not occur that day, nor could it be assigned to a specific hour. The time, as the letter described it, would fall somewhere within the next 3 days, during an exhibition that had already drawn attention from across the city. The object in question was not named directly, yet it did not need to be. There was only one item that could command such interest, and its presence had already been announced in every paper that cared to report it. The Royal Emerald. It would be displayed for 3 days only within the central gallery of the museum, under conditions that had been described as sufficient to prevent even the smallest interference. The letter did not dispute those conditions. It did not describe how they would fail, nor did it attempt to explain by what means the theft would be carried out. It stated only that it would happen, and that it could not be prevented. There are, in such statements, two possibilities. Either they are written without knowledge and may be dismissed without consequence, or they contain just enough truth to resist that dismissal, requiring attention not because they demand it, but because they refuse to be ignored. Blackwood did not treat the letter as a warning. He treated it as a problem. Its certainty was not expressed through detail, but through absence. It offered nothing that could be verified directly, and yet it aligned too closely with known circumstances to be regarded as coincidence. The exhibition was real. The object was real. The duration was precise. Only the method was withheld. And it was in that omission that the letter acquired its weight. To prevent a theft requires knowledge of how it will be attempted. Without that knowledge, protection becomes general rather than specific, and general protection, however thorough, cannot account for what has been deliberately concealed. Blackwood understood this. The museum, when considered in its entirety, presented a structure that could be guarded, but not controlled in every detail. Visitors would pass through its halls, their movements observed but not entirely restricted. The object itself would remain behind glass, secured against direct interference, yet still visible, still present within a space that allowed proximity. It was not the strength of the protection that concerned him. It was its predictability. The letter did not describe a breach of that protection. It implied something quieter, something that would occur within the boundaries already established, unnoticed until the moment had already passed. To act against such a possibility required more than reinforcement. It required a different approach. Blackwood did not seek to prevent the theft in the manner expected of him. He did not attempt to close every gap, nor to anticipate every variation of a plan he could not yet see. Instead, he allowed the conditions described in the letter to remain as they were, altering only what could not be observed directly. If the theft were to occur, it would do so within a structure he had already examined. And if it could not be prevented, then it could be understood. There are moments, in the course of an investigation, where certainty does not arise from control, but from acceptance. To follow a design, one must first allow it to unfold. The exhibition opened as scheduled. The emerald was placed within its case, its surface catching the light in a manner that drew attention without effort. Visitors moved through the gallery with the quiet interest such objects inspire, their presence forming a pattern that repeated with minor variation throughout the day. Nothing appeared unusual. Nothing suggested that the statement contained within the letter would prove true. And yet, the absence of irregularity did not resolve the matter. It defined it. For if the theft were to occur within such conditions, it would not do so by breaking them. It would do so by remaining entirely within them. The morning of the exhibition arrived without urgency, though the city had already begun to shape its expectations around it. Notices had been placed in the days prior, and the presence of the emerald, though temporary, had drawn a level of attention that extended beyond the ordinary. Carriages moved more frequently along the street leading to the museum, and those who passed its entrance did so with a quiet awareness that something of value had been placed within. From the outside, the building revealed nothing of this distinction. Its structure remained unchanged, its stone surface bearing the same marks of age and weather that had defined it for years. The doors, set within a shallow arch, opened and closed with the same measured regularity, allowing entry without suggestion of what lay beyond. There was no visible reinforcement, no alteration to its appearance that would indicate the presence of an object considered worthy of exceptional protection. The precautions, as Edmund understood them, had been placed within. He arrived before the exhibition opened to the public, moving through the entrance at a time when the interior remained quiet, its spaces defined more by arrangement than by movement. The central gallery, prepared in advance, had been cleared of all but what was necessary. The display case stood at its center, its glass surface reflecting the soft light that entered from above, diffused in such a way that no single source could be identified. The emerald had not yet been placed inside. This absence, though temporary, allowed the structure surrounding it to be observed without distraction. The case itself was constructed with care, its fittings concealed within the frame, its base fixed to the floor in a manner that did not invite adjustment. It could not be moved without effort, nor could it be opened without access to the mechanism that secured it. That mechanism remained unseen. Edmund Blackwood did not attempt to uncover it directly. Instead, he considered the case in relation to its surroundings. The distance between it and the nearest point of entry, the alignment of the walls, and the manner in which light settled upon its surface all contributed to a space that was open yet controlled. Anyone approaching the case would do so within view, their movement observable from multiple positions within the gallery. This visibility formed the basis of its protection. It did not rely on concealment, but on exposure. The assumption, as it had been presented, was that no action could take place without being seen. The presence of attendants, positioned at intervals throughout the room, reinforced this assumption, their attention directed not at any one individual, but at the movement of the space as a whole. Such an arrangement appeared sufficient. Yet it possessed a quality that Blackwood did not disregard. It was consistent. Every element of the gallery had been arranged to produce the same effect, to guide attention in a predictable manner and to ensure that no part of the space remained unobserved for long. This consistency, while effective in principle, introduced a form of stability that could be studied, anticipated, and, if necessary, used. The emerald was brought into the room shortly thereafter. It did not arrive with ceremony, nor was its placement marked by any particular emphasis. It was carried with care, positioned within the case, and secured without delay. Once enclosed, it appeared unchanged by its surroundings, its surface reflecting the light with a quiet clarity that drew the eye without demanding it. Its presence altered the room. Where there had been structure, there was now focus. Visitors, once admitted, would not observe the gallery in its entirety. Their attention would settle upon the object at its center, and in doing so, they would align themselves with the very pattern the room had been designed to produce. This alignment was not incidental. It defined the manner in which the space would be experienced. Edmund remained for a time after the placement had been completed, observing the gallery not as it would appear in isolation, but as it would function once occupied. The paths available to those who entered, the points at which they would pause, and the intervals between those pauses formed a pattern that, while variable in detail, remained consistent in its structure. No individual would remain in one place for long. No movement would be entirely without witness. And yet, within this constant observation, there existed a subtle limitation. Attention, though present, was not fixed. It shifted. From one visitor to another, from the object to the movement surrounding it, and back again, forming a continuous cycle that, while unbroken, was never entirely focused in a single direction. This shifting This shifting of attention did not weaken the arrangement of the gallery. It defined its limit. What appeared at first as complete visibility revealed itself, under closer consideration, as a sequence of brief absences. No individual observer could maintain a constant focus on every movement within the room. Their attention, though present, moved in cycles, guided by motion, by light, and by expectation. In those cycles, there existed moments, small and precise, in which what had been visible a moment before no longer occupied the center of awareness. Edmund recognized this not as a flaw, but as a condition that could be measured. He remained within the gallery as the first visitors were admitted, observing not the object itself, but the manner in which the room responded to their presence. Their movement, though varied in pace, followed a pattern that did not require instruction. They entered, paused at a distance, then moved closer, drawn by the clarity of the emerald within the glass. For a time, their attention remained fixed upon it, before shifting once more either toward the exit or toward the surrounding space. No one remained still for long. No one observed without interruption. The attendants, positioned to maintain order, followed a similar rhythm. Their gaze passed from one visitor to another, from the object to the space surrounding it, and back again. Their presence reinforced the impression of constant observation, yet it did not eliminate the intervals in which attention was divided. Blackwood allowed this pattern to settle into his understanding without attempting to alter it. To do so would have been to change the very conditions described in the letter. Instead, he considered how such a pattern might be used. If the theft were to occur within the boundaries of the room, it would not depend on the absence of observation, but on the nature of it. It would rely not on concealment, but on timing, on the precise alignment of movement and inattention that allowed an action to pass without recognition. This required more than opportunity. It required preparation. Edmund Blackwood shifted his attention from the visitors to the structure of the gallery itself, tracing the paths that movement naturally followed. The entrance, the central display, and the gradual movement outward formed a sequence that repeated with minor variation. Each visitor, regardless of intent, became part of this sequence, their presence contributing to a pattern that, once established, could be anticipated. Within that anticipation lay the possibility of control, not of the individuals themselves, but of the conditions under which they moved. The emerald remained at the center of this arrangement, its presence constant, its appearance unchanged. It reflected the light in a manner that drew the eye without effort, creating a point toward which attention returned, again and again, regardless of where it had shifted. This constancy, while essential to its display, introduced a form of expectation. Visitors expected it to remain as it was. They did not approach it with suspicion, but with recognition, their attention shaped by what they had been told they would see. The case, the light, and the object within it formed a complete image, one that required no further examination to be accepted. Such acceptance, Edmund understood, could be used. He allowed his gaze to move, not to the emerald itself, but to the reflections upon the glass. The surface, though clear, did not exist in isolation. It carried with it the image of the room, distorted slightly by angle and light, creating layers that overlapped without drawing attention. Within those layers, the boundary between object and reflection was not always precise. For a moment, the emerald could appear doubled, its image reflected in a manner that suggested continuity where there was none. This effect, though subtle, occurred naturally, requiring no intervention to produce it. Blackwood did not regard it as incidental. He regarded it as an indication. If perception could be guided by reflection, then the presence of the object might be confirmed without direct verification. A visitor, observing what appeared to be the emerald, would not question whether what they saw was the object itself or its image, provided that the distinction was not made obvious. This did not yet explain how the theft would occur, but it suggested how it might pass unnoticed. Edmund allowed this possibility to remain without conclusion, turning instead to the attendants once more. Their position, though fixed, did not grant them control over every angle of the room. There were moments, brief and unremarkable, in which their line of sight aligned with the reflections upon the glass rather than with the object itself. In such moments, observation remained, yet its accuracy shifted. The presence of the emerald could be assumed without being confirmed. This distinction, though slight, carried weight. If the theft were to occur, it would not do so by removing the object in a way that created absence. It would require the preservation of appearance, the continuation of expectation beyond the moment at which the object itself had already been altered or removed. Blackwood did not yet know how this would be achieved, but he no longer believed that the theft would be defined by a single moment. It would be defined by a transition so carefully aligned with the movement of the room that it would not be recognized as such, passing instead as part of the same pattern that had already been established. The first day of the exhibition continued without interruption. Visitors arrived, observed, and departed, each following the same quiet rhythm that the gallery encouraged. The emerald remained in place, its presence unquestioned, its image consistent with expectation. Nothing occurred. And yet, for Edmund, this absence did not diminish the certainty of the letter. It confirmed it. For if the theft were to take place within 3 days, then its preparation had already begun. And what could not yet be seen was already part of what would follow. The second day of the exhibition unfolded with the same quiet order as the first, its rhythm already established and no longer requiring adjustment. Visitors continued to pass through the gallery in a steady flow, their movements guided not by instruction, but by the arrangement of the space itself. They entered, paused, observed, and departed, each following a pattern that felt natural, though it had been carefully shaped. The emerald remained unchanged at the center of the room. Its surface caught the light with the same measured clarity, drawing attention without force, and holding it only long enough to be acknowledged before it shifted elsewhere. Nothing in its appearance suggested that anything had altered since the previous day, and yet the absence of change did not suggest stillness. It suggested repetition, and within repetition, Edmund began to look for what did not belong. He arrived early once more, before the gallery had fully filled, positioning himself where both the entrance and the display could be observed without interruption. From there, the movement of each visitor could be followed as part of a continuous sequence, their paths forming a structure that repeated with only slight variation. It was within this repetition that something began to take shape, not as an action, but as a consistency that extended beyond chance. Among those who entered, one visitor returned. At first, this did not appear unusual. Exhibitions of such nature often drew individuals more than once, their interest extending beyond a single visit. Yet the manner of this return differed in a way that was not immediately visible, but gradually became apparent through observation. The man did not arrive at varying times, nor did he alter his movement through the gallery. His presence aligned with a precision that did not occur naturally. He arrived at nearly the same hour. He followed the same path. He paused at the same distance from the display. This repetition, though subtle, carried a degree of intention that distinguished it from the movements surrounding him. He did not stand apart from the others in appearance, nor did he behave in a manner that would draw attention. His clothing was unremarkable, his posture calm, and his pace consistent with those around him. He did not hurry, and he did not hesitate. And yet, he returned not to observe, but to confirm. Edmund Blackwood did not approach him, nor did he alter his own position in a way that might disrupt what had already begun to reveal itself. Instead, he allowed the pattern to continue, watching as the man took his place among the other visitors, indistinguishable except for the precision of his timing. It was not his presence that drew attention, but the consistency with which it repeated. On his third appearance, Edmund adjusted his position only slightly, enough to alter the angle at which the display case could be observed. From there, the reflections upon the glass became more defined, layering the image of the emerald with the movement of the room behind it. These reflections did not obscure the object, but they introduced a secondary image that shifted with position and light, creating moments in which what was seen was not entirely what was present. As the man reached his usual place, the movement of another visitor passed briefly behind him, aligning with the reflection upon the glass. For a moment, the emerald appeared doubled, its image overlapping with itself before resolving once more into a single form. The change was slight, and it passed without notice, absorbed into the natural shifting of light and movement. No one reacted. No one paused. Nothing was interrupted. And yet, within that moment, something had been confirmed. The man did not direct his attention toward the emerald itself, but toward the point at which its image and its reflection met. His gaze remained steady, not searching, but observing with the quiet certainty of someone who did not require the object to be examined directly. What he sought was not the emerald as it appeared, but the condition under which it could be seen. Blackwood allowed this observation to settle without interference. To approach would have altered the pattern, and the pattern, in its current form, revealed more than any direct inquiry might. The man remained for only a short time longer, then moved away with the same measured calm with which he had arrived, leaving no indication that his presence had differed in any meaningful way. Yet his absence did not remove the significance of what had been observed. It clarified it. Edmund remained within the gallery, allowing the movement of the room to return to its established rhythm. Other visitors approached, observed, and departed, their actions aligning with expectation. The reflections upon the glass continued to shift, forming the same subtle distortions that had passed unnoticed before. But none of those who followed repeated the same precision, nor did they return to confirm what they had seen. The distinction did not lie in behavior. It lay in intention. The man had not needed to approach more closely, nor to remain longer than necessary. He had not drawn attention, nor had he deviated from what might be considered ordinary. And yet, within the consistency of his movement, he had completed something that did not require repetition. For Edmund, this did not yet define the method of the theft, but it defined its preparation. The second day continued without interruption, its surface undisturbed, its structure intact. The emerald remained within its case, unchanged in appearance, and those who passed through the gallery carried with them no reason to question what they had seen. And yet, beneath that appearance, something had already been set in place. Not through force, not through absence, but through alignment. What remained was not the discovery of the plan, but the moment at which it would be completed. And that moment, Edmund understood, would not announce itself. By the time the second day approached its end, the structure of the exhibition had settled into something that no longer required attention to maintain. The movement of visitors, the positioning of attendants, and the quiet presence of the emerald at the center of the gallery had formed a balance that appeared stable, even complete. Nothing within it suggested strain, and nothing called for adjustment. It was precisely this stability that Edmund found most difficult to disregard. He remained within the gallery longer than on the previous day, allowing the final hours to unfold without interruption. The number of visitors gradually diminished, their presence thinning until the space began to return to the stillness with which it had opened. The patterns that had defined the day did not disappear, but they slowed, stretching into longer intervals that made each movement more distinct. In that slowing, smaller details became easier to observe. The attendants, no longer required to divide their attention among a constant flow of visitors, adjusted their positions with subtle shifts that did not alter their purpose, but changed their relation to the space. Their lines of sight lengthened, their focus less frequently interrupted, and yet even within this increased clarity, their attention remained subject to movement, to light, and to expectation. Blackwood observed these adjustments without interfering, noting how the structure of the room responded as its conditions changed. What had appeared controlled during the height of the day revealed, in its quieter state, a different kind of vulnerability. Not one created by absence, but by familiarity. The attendants, having spent hours within the same arrangement, no longer observed it with the same precision. Their attention did not fail, but it settled. It became habitual. The emerald, unchanged in its position, continued to hold the center of the room, its presence unchallenged and unquestioned. It had been seen repeatedly by every person who had entered, and in being seen so often, it had lost the quality of uncertainty that might have invited closer examination. It was no longer an object to be verified, but one to be assumed. This assumption, Edmund understood, extended beyond the visitors. It shaped the behavior of those entrusted with its protection. As the final visitors departed and the gallery prepared to close, Edmund Blackwood shifted his attention once more to the display case itself. Without the movement of the crowd, the reflections upon its surface became more defined, less interrupted by passing figures, and more dependent on the fixed positions of light within the room. The emerald appeared clearer, its image less subject to distortion, yet even in this clarity, the surface of the glass retained its layered quality. It did not present the object alone. It presented the space around it. For a moment, as one of the attendants crossed the far side of the gallery, the reflection upon the glass aligned in such a way that the emerald appeared slightly displaced, its image not entirely centered within the case. The effect was subtle and brief, resolving almost immediately as the movement passed, yet it introduced a question that did not depend on duration. How long, Edmund considered, would such a displacement need to exist to go unnoticed? Not by chance, but by design. He did not approach the case, nor did he attempt to test its mechanism directly. The conditions of the room remained as they had been arranged, and to alter them would have been to introduce uncertainty where none yet existed. Instead, he allowed the moment to pass, retaining only its implication. The emerald did not need to be removed in a way that created absence. It needed only to be replaced in a way that preserved expectation. Blackwood turned from the display and allowed his attention to move once more across the room, tracing the positions of those who remained. The attendants prepared to secure the gallery for the night, their actions measured and routine, each step following from the last without deviation. The doors would be closed, the lights reduced, and the space left undisturbed until the following morning. Nothing within this process suggested opportunity. And yet, it was within such processes that opportunity most often resided. The routines that define a place, once established, are rarely questioned. They are repeated because they have worked, and in that repetition, they become predictable. What is predictable can be anticipated, and what can be anticipated can be used. Edmund did not yet know whether the theft would occur during the hours of darkness or in the presence of the crowd. The letter had offered no such detail, and the pattern he had observed did not yet resolve that uncertainty. What it had revealed was not the moment of the act, but the conditions under which it would pass without recognition. Those conditions were now clear. They did not depend on force. They did not depend on absence. They depended on continuity. The emerald, whether present or replaced, would appear as it was expected to appear. The room, whether altered or unchanged, would continue to function as it had before. Those within it would observe what they believed to be constant, and in doing so, they would confirm the very illusion that allowed the change to remain unseen. As the gallery was secured and the final light diminished, Edmund remained for a moment longer, allowing the stillness to settle fully before he departed. The structure of the room, now empty, appeared complete, its arrangement undisturbed, its purpose intact. Nothing had occurred, and yet, the sense of completion did not belong to the day that had ended. It belonged to something that had already been set in motion. The third day would not introduce the plan. It would conclude it. The third day began with a clarity that differed slightly from those that had come before it. The sky, though still muted by the familiar haze that lingered over the city, allowed for a steadier light to pass through the high windows of the gallery. This light did not alter the arrangement of the room, but it refined it, softening the shadows and reducing the variations that had previously accompanied the movement of visitors. What had once shifted with each passing figure now appeared more constant, the surfaces of the glass and stone holding their form with greater precision. For Edmund, this change did not suggest improvement. It suggested control. He arrived before the doors were opened, as he had on the previous mornings, entering a space that had already been prepared for repetition. The display case stood unchanged, its position fixed, its surface clear, and the emerald within it presenting the same image that had been observed throughout the exhibition. Nothing in its appearance suggested alteration, and yet Edmund did not approach it directly. To verify what could be assumed would have been to misunderstand the nature of what he observed. Instead, he allowed his attention to move outward, tracing the structure of the room as it would soon be occupied. The attendants took their positions, their movements practiced, and without hesitation, each step following from the last with the quiet certainty of routine. The doors, once opened, admitted the first visitors, and with them, the pattern resumed. It did not begin. It continued. The early hours passed without interruption, their rhythm slower than what would follow, yet no less defined. Visitors approached the display with the same measured curiosity, their attention settling upon the emerald before shifting elsewhere. The reflections upon the glass, now steadier under the clearer light, created fewer distortions, yet they did not disappear entirely. They remained subtle and present, shaping perception without drawing notice. Blackwood observed this without seeking to alter it. The clarity of the light did not remove the possibility of deception. It refined it. Where before the reflections had shifted more freely, now they aligned with greater consistency, producing moments in which the image of the emerald appeared uninterrupted, even when partially obscured. This continuity did not depend on constant visibility, but on the absence of disruption. As long as nothing appeared to change, nothing would be questioned. This, Edmund understood, was the condition upon which the plan relied. As the morning progressed, the flow of visitors increased, and with it, the movement within the gallery became more complex. The patterns that had been observed in isolation now overlapped, creating layers of motion that did not cancel one another, but combined into a structure that was both active and predictable. Each individual followed their own path, yet those paths intersected in ways that repeated, forming a rhythm that could be anticipated. Within this rhythm, the man returned. He appeared as he had before, neither early nor late, his arrival aligning with the interval that had already been established. His movement through the gallery did not differ from previous days, nor did his presence draw attention from those around him. He remained part of the pattern, indistinguishable except for the precision with which he followed it. Edmund Blackwood did not shift his position. He did not need to. The man approached the display and paused at the same distance as before, his posture unchanged, his gaze steady. The light, clearer now than on the previous day, reduced the complexity of the reflections, yet did not eliminate them entirely. For a moment, as another visitor passed behind him, the image upon the glass aligned once more, producing the same subtle doubling that had been observed before. The man's attention did not waver. He did not adjust his position. He did not move closer. And yet, within that stillness, there existed a certainty that no longer required confirmation. He had returned not to observe, but to complete. Blackwood allowed the moment to pass without interference, his attention remaining fixed not upon the man himself, but upon the structure that surrounded him. The movement of the room continued uninterrupted, the attendants maintaining their positions, the visitors forming and dissolving into patterns that repeated without variation. Nothing had changed, and yet everything required for the change had already been placed within it. Edmund did not yet move. To act before the moment would have been to disrupt what he had allowed to unfold. The letter had not described the method, but it had defined the certainty, and that certainty had now reached its final stage. The preparation, subtle and unobserved, no longer remained incomplete. What followed would not announce itself. It would pass as part of the same pattern that had already been accepted. The man remained for only a short time longer before stepping away from the display, his departure as unremarkable as his arrival. He did not hurry, nor did he delay, and in leaving, he did not draw attention to what had just occurred, if indeed anything had occurred at all. The emerald remained within the case. Its surface reflected the light as it had before. Its presence, to all who observed it, appeared unchanged. And yet, for Edmund, the certainty no longer lay in what could be seen. It lay in what no longer required to be. For if the plan had reached its completion, then the act itself no longer depended on action. It depended on recognition. And recognition, he understood, would not come immediately. It would come later, when the absence, carefully concealed within presence, could no longer remain so. The remainder of the morning passed without interruption, its movement indistinguishable from what had preceded it. Visitors continued to enter, observe, and depart, their attention guided by the same arrangement that had defined the exhibition from the beginning. The emerald remained at the center of that arrangement, its presence unquestioned, its image consistent with expectation. Nothing appeared to have changed. And yet, for Edmund, the certainty that something had already occurred did not depend on appearance. It had formed earlier, within the quiet precision of repetition, and now remained, steady and without urgency, as he allowed the structure of the gallery to continue undisturbed. He did not approach the display. To do so would have introduced a point of focus where none yet existed. Instead, Edmund Blackwood observed the movement of the room as a whole, allowing each detail to pass without interruption. The attendants maintained their positions, their attention distributed across the space in the same measured manner as before. The visitors, unaware of any alteration, continued to align themselves with the expectations the gallery had established, their gaze settling upon the emerald only long enough to confirm what they believed to be constant. This confirmation did not require scrutiny. It required only recognition. The surface of the glass reflected the light with a clarity that no longer shifted as it had on previous days. The steadiness of the illumination reduced the variability of the reflections, creating an image that appeared uninterrupted even when partially obscured. Those who observed the emerald did so without hesitation, their perception guided not by examination, but by familiarity. They saw what they expected to see, and in doing so, they confirmed it. Blackwood remained where he was, allowing time to pass without interference. The man who had returned earlier did not reappear, nor did any other visitor exhibit the same precision of movement. The pattern of the room continued without deviation, its structure holding firm, its surface undisturbed. Nothing invited attention. Nothing required correction. It was this absence of disruption that defined the moment. For if the theft had depended on concealment, it would have left some trace of its occurrence, however slight. A movement out of place, a hesitation, a shift in behavior that did not align with expectation. Yet no such indication presented itself. The room remained as it had been, its order intact, its function unchanged. The alteration, Edmund understood, had not interrupted the pattern. It had preserved it. He allowed his attention to return, briefly, to the display case, not to examine it, but to observe the manner in which it was perceived by those who approached it. Each visitor, upon reaching the central position, directed their gaze toward the emerald and, within that brief moment, accepted its presence without question. No one remained long enough to observe it beyond what was necessary to confirm what they believed to be unchanged. The object did not need to withstand scrutiny. It needed only to withstand expectation. Edmund did not move. The moment at which intervention might have prevented the act had already passed, and to act now without certainty would have disrupted the very conditions that allowed the truth to remain concealed. The letter had not asked for prevention, and he had not chosen it. What remained was understanding, and understanding required patience. Time continued to pass. The movement of the gallery shifted gradually toward the later hours of the day, its rhythm slowing once more as the number of visitors began to diminish. The patterns that had defined the morning stretched into longer intervals, their repetition less frequent, yet no less consistent. The emerald remained in place, its appearance unchanged, its presence accepted without question. Nothing within the room suggested absence. And yet, absence had already been placed within it, not as a void, but as a substitution. Blackwood allowed this conclusion to settle without haste. It did not arise from a single observation, nor from a moment that could be defined with precision. It emerged gradually from the accumulation of consistency that no longer required confirmation. The object that remained within the case fulfilled every expectation placed upon it. It appeared correct. It reflected light as expected. It occupied the same position. And for this reason, it no longer required to be what it seemed. Edmund Blackwood turned slightly from the display, his attention returning once more to the structure of the room. The attendants continued their duties, their awareness unbroken, yet their certainty complete. They guarded what they believed to be present, and in doing so, they reinforced the illusion that nothing had changed. The final hours approached without disturbance. The exhibition continued, and within it, the theft, having already occurred, remained unrecognized. For the moment, until recognition, delayed by design, would arrive not as a discovery, but as a contradiction. And when it did, it would not reveal when the act had taken place, only that it had. The moment of recognition did not arrive with urgency. It emerged slowly, without announcement, as the final hours of the exhibition drew toward their conclusion. The movement within the gallery had already begun to thin, the steady flow of visitors reduced to occasional presence, their steps quieter, their pauses shorter, as though the day itself had begun to withdraw from the room. Nothing within this change suggested disruption. And yet, it was within this quieter state that the first uncertainty appeared. It did not begin with the emerald. It began with its inspection. As the exhibition approached its close, the routines that governed the gallery shifted from observation to verification. The attendants, having spent the day maintaining order, now turned their attention toward confirming what had been assumed throughout its duration. This process did not introduce anything new. It followed established procedure, repeated at the end of each day, its purpose not to question, but to confirm. Edmund remained within the gallery as this process began, his position unchanged, his attention steady. He did not approach the display, nor did he direct attention toward it. What he observed was not the object itself, but the manner in which those responsible for it approached their task. Their movement did not suggest concern. It suggested completion. One of the attendants moved toward the display case with the quiet certainty of routine, his steps measured, his attention focused not on discovery, but on confirmation. He paused before the glass, his gaze settling upon the emerald as it had countless times before, his expectation already formed. For a moment, nothing changed. The object appeared as it had throughout the day, its surface reflecting the light with the same clarity, its position unchanged, its presence complete. There was no visible disturbance, no indication that anything required further attention. And yet, the process did not end there. The inspection required more than observation. It required contact. The attendant reached toward the case, his movement unhurried, his familiarity with the mechanism evident in the precision with which he acted. The glass, secured throughout the day, was opened with care, its movement controlled, its sound minimal. The emerald remained within, unchanged in appearance, its presence still aligned with expectation. For a brief moment, the room remained as it had been. Then something altered, not in the object, but in the manner in which it was perceived. The attendant did not withdraw his hand immediately. His movement, though slight, paused in a way that did not align with the routine that had guided it. His posture remained steady, yet within that stillness there appeared a hesitation, not of uncertainty, but of recognition that had not yet fully formed. He did not step back. He did not call attention. And yet, something had shifted. Edmund Blackwood observed this without movement, his attention narrowing not upon the object, but upon the change in behavior that surrounded it. The emerald, still within the case, continued to reflect the light as it had before. Its surface, its color, and its position remained unchanged. But its presence no longer produced certainty. The attendant's hand moved again, this time not to open or to secure, but to adjust. The emerald, touched with care, did not resist, nor did it respond in any way that might suggest alteration. And yet, within that contact, the final assumption that had sustained its presence began to dissolve. The object, though identical in appearance, did not carry the same weight. This difference was not visible. It was not measurable by sight, but it was known. The attendant withdrew his hand slowly, his movement controlled, his expression unchanged, yet no longer aligned with routine. He did not speak, nor did he immediately act upon what he had perceived. Instead, he allowed the moment to settle, as though what he had recognized required confirmation before it could be acknowledged. The room remained still. No one else had yet observed the change. The emerald remained in place, its image unchanged, its presence still accepted by those who had not yet questioned it. The illusion, carefully constructed, continued to hold, its surface undisturbed, its function intact. And yet, within that stillness, the first certainty had been broken. Edmund did not move toward the display. He did not need to. The moment that had been delayed had now arrived, not as an interruption, but as a realization that could no longer remain contained. What had appeared consistent throughout the day had begun to reveal itself as incomplete, its continuity no longer sufficient to sustain belief. The theft had not been discovered, but it had been felt, and once felt, it could not be unseen. The attendant remained where he was, his attention fixed upon the object that no longer confirmed what it appeared to be. The routine that had guided his actions had come to its natural end, replaced not by alarm, but by a quiet recognition that something, though unchanged in form, had already ceased to be what it was meant to represent. Blackwood allowed this moment to extend, unbroken and without interference. For within it, the transition from certainty to doubt had begun, and once begun, it would not return to what it had been. The moment of doubt, once formed, did not dissolve. It remained within the room, quiet and contained, yet impossible to ignore. The attendant, having withdrawn his hand, did not immediately act upon what he had perceived. His movement, though controlled, no longer followed the rhythm of routine. Instead, it lingered, as though awaiting a second confirmation before allowing the conclusion to take shape. Edmund observed this without interruption, his attention fixed not upon the emerald itself, but upon the shift that had taken place around it. The object remained within the case, unchanged in appearance, its surface reflecting the light with the same measured clarity. To any who had not yet questioned it, it remained entirely as expected. But expectation had already been altered. The attendant, after a brief stillness, returned his hand to the object, this time with a greater degree of intention. His movement was careful, not out of uncertainty, but out of recognition that what he was about to confirm could not be undone. The emerald was lifted, its surface catching the light as before, its color unchanged, its form precise. And yet, within that motion, the difference became undeniable. It did not belong to the object. It belonged to its absence. The weight, once confirmed through contact, now extended into certainty. What remained within the case was not what had been placed there. It fulfilled the appearance, but not the substance. The illusion, sustained throughout the day, had reached its limit. The emerald had been replaced. The attendant did not raise his voice, nor did he call immediate attention to the discovery. Instead, he lowered the object back into the case with the same care with which he had lifted it, as though the act of restoring its position might preserve, for a moment longer, the structure that had already begun to fail. The room remained unchanged. No alarm was given. No interruption occurred. And yet, within the stillness, the certainty of the theft settled into place. Blackwood did not approach at once. To do so would have shifted the moment from recognition into reaction, and reaction, in such cases, often obscured what had already been revealed. Instead, he allowed the understanding to extend beyond the attendant, observing as its presence began to alter the behavior of the space. The attendant moved away from the case, not in haste, but with purpose, his steps directed toward those responsible for the security of the exhibition. His expression did not convey alarm, yet his movement no longer aligned with routine. It carried with it the quiet urgency of knowledge that could not remain contained. Edmund Blackwood remained where he was, his attention returning briefly to the display. The emerald, still within the case, continued to present the same image as before. Nothing in its appearance revealed the substitution, nor did it invite suspicion from those who had not yet been made aware of the change. The illusion remained intact. For those who did not yet know, nothing had been lost. This continuity, Edmund understood, was not incidental. It was the final part of the design. The theft had not been constructed to create absence, but to delay its recognition. The object had been removed in such a way that its presence could continue to be assumed, allowing time to pass without interruption and ensuring that the moment of discovery would not coincide with the moment of the act. Time, in this case, had been separated from event, and in that separation, the distance between cause and recognition had been extended beyond immediate reach. Blackwood turned his attention once more to the movement within the gallery. The attendants, now informed, began to adjust their positions with a care that did not yet draw attention from the remaining visitors. Their actions remained measured, their voices contained, as though the structure of the room were being preserved even as its purpose had already been compromised. The doors were not yet closed. The visitors had not yet been removed. The exhibition, for all appearances, continued. And within that continuation, the theft, now confirmed, remained concealed. Edmund did not yet act. The removal of the emerald had already been completed, and whatever method had been used to achieve it had done so without disruption. To respond now without understanding would have been to follow the absence, rather than the design that had created it. What mattered was not the object that had been taken. It was the manner in which it had been replaced. For within that replacement lay the method, and within the method, the means by which the one responsible could be found. The room, though unchanged in appearance, no longer functioned as it had before. Its structure remained, its order held, but its certainty had been broken. And from that fracture, the investigation would begin. Once the certainty of the substitution had been established, the structure of the room could no longer be observed as it had been before. What had once appeared complete now revealed itself as a sequence of decisions, each made within conditions that had been carefully maintained. The emerald, no longer present, had not been removed through force or disruption, but through alignment with those conditions. To understand the act required more than identifying its result. It required tracing the pattern that had allowed it. Edmund did not begin with the object. He began with movement. The gallery, though altered in purpose, still retained the rhythm that had defined it throughout the exhibition. The attendants, now aware of the theft, adjusted their behavior with restraint, ensuring that the remaining visitors did not perceive what had already been discovered. Their positions remained consistent, their attention controlled, and yet within that control there existed a change. They no longer observed the room. They observed each other. This shift, though subtle, marked the beginning of the investigation. Blackwood allowed his attention to return to the sequence of the previous hours, reconstructing not the event itself, but the conditions under which it must have occurred. The moment of substitution had not been witnessed, nor had it produced any visible disruption. It had passed within the continuity of the room, preserved by expectation and confirmed by routine. Such an act could not depend on chance. It required preparation that extended beyond a single moment. Edmund Blackwood turned his focus to those who had been present more than once. Visitors, by their nature, moved through the gallery without leaving trace, their presence temporary and their actions unrecorded beyond memory. Yet repetition, when precise, introduced a form of presence that could not be dismissed. It created a pattern that existed independently of individual observation. Among those patterns, one remained. The man who had returned. Edmund did not seek him within the room. He was no longer there. Instead, he considered the intervals of his appearances, the consistency of his movement, and the manner in which his attention had been directed. The man had not behaved as one observing an object of interest. He had behaved as one confirming a condition. That condition, now understood, did not relate to the emerald itself. It related to the environment surrounding it. Blackwood retraced, in memory, the alignment that had occurred upon the glass of the display case, the brief doubling of the emerald's image, and the manner in which the man had positioned himself to observe it. That moment, though slight, had not been incidental. It had been sought, and once found, it had not required repetition. The man had returned to confirm that what was necessary remained unchanged. Once confirmed, he had no need to remain. Edmund allowed this conclusion to settle, not as certainty, but as direction. The theft, though already completed, did not exist in isolation. It was part of a sequence that extended beyond the gallery, beyond the exhibition, and beyond the moment at which the object had been replaced. The one responsible had not acted alone. He had acted within a structure. Blackwood shifted his attention to the staff of the museum, not as suspects, but as part of that structure. Their routines, their positions, and their familiarity with the space had defined the conditions under which the exhibition operated. None of them, by their behavior, had introduced disruption. Yet it was precisely this consistency that allowed the act to pass unnoticed. Edmund did not assume their involvement, but he did not exclude their proximity. The mechanism of the display case, the positioning of the object, and the intervals at which it was observed all depended on knowledge that did not belong to a visitor alone. To replicate the emerald without immediate detection required not only access, but understanding. Understanding of light, of reflection, of expectation. Blackwood remained within the gallery as the final visitors were quietly guided toward the exit, their departure managed without alarm. The space, gradually emptying, began to return once more to stillness, its structure intact, its purpose altered. The emerald, or what remained in its place, continued to occupy the center of the room. It no longer served as an object of display. It served as evidence. Edmund did not yet remove it. To do so would have ended the illusion that still held value. What remained within the case, though false, preserved the conditions under which the theft had been completed. Those conditions, if maintained, could reveal more than the absence of the object ever could. Blackwood turned slightly, allowing his attention to pass once more across the gallery, now nearly empty. The attendants, their awareness heightened, maintained their positions, though their purpose had shifted from observation to containment. The room, though unchanged in form, no longer belonged to the exhibition. It belonged to the investigation. And within that investigation, the pattern that had once guided movement would now guide understanding. The man who had returned had not taken the emerald. He had confirmed the moment at which it could be taken. The act itself, Edmund understood, had occurred elsewhere within the same pattern, concealed not by distance, but by continuity. To find the one responsible would require more than identifying who had been present. It would require identifying who had not needed to be. The investigation did not begin with accusation. It began with limitation. Edmund understood that what had occurred could not be explained through broad suspicion. The structure within which the theft had taken place was too controlled, too consistent to allow for random opportunity. Whoever had acted had done so within precise conditions, relying not on access alone, but on understanding. To find that understanding required narrowing what was possible. Blackwood remained within the gallery as it was secured, allowing the final procedures of the day to unfold without interruption. The attendants, now aware of the substitution, moved with greater care, their actions deliberate, their attention no longer divided. The case remained closed, the false emerald still within, its presence preserved for the purpose of examination. Nothing was removed. Nothing was altered. The room, though no longer public, retained the form it had held throughout the day. Edmund did not approach the display immediately. Instead, he allowed his attention to move across the mechanisms that supported it, considering not the object, but the conditions that had allowed it to be replaced without detection. The glass, the frame, and the concealed locking mechanism had not been forced. There were no marks, no irregularities that might suggest intrusion. The case had been opened and closed again with care. This conclusion did not arise from a single detail, but from their absence. The emerald had not been removed through the glass, nor displaced through misdirection alone. It had been accessed directly, its position altered within the case itself in a manner that preserved the appearance of continuity. Such access could not depend on chance. It depended on familiarity. Not formal authority, but a familiarity so complete that it no longer required to be questioned. The mechanism that secured the case was not visible, nor was it available to those who passed through the gallery as visitors. Its operation belonged to those who maintained it, who had handled it before the exhibition opened, and who ensured that its function remained uninterrupted. Edmund Blackwood turned his attention to the sequence by which the emerald had first been placed within the case. It had been brought, positioned, and secured through a process that, though controlled, had required human action at each stage. That process, once understood, could be repeated without drawing attention, provided that the conditions remained unchanged. Blackwood moved closer to the display, not to examine the emerald itself, but to observe the frame that contained it. The construction revealed nothing unusual, its surface smooth, its joints precise, its design intended to conceal rather than display its mechanism. And yet, even within such concealment, there existed a point of access that could not be entirely removed. No mechanism functions without position. The opening of the case required alignment, a specific relation between hand and structure that could not be achieved from any angle. It depended on knowledge not only of how it worked, but of where it could be engaged without hesitation. Edmund allowed his gaze to follow the edges of the frame, tracing the lines that defined its construction. The glass, though seamless in appearance, was held within a structure that required division. That division, however well concealed, defined where the case could be opened. It was not visible, but it was fixed. Blackwood did not attempt to test it. The absence of force, combined with the presence of substitution, defined the method more clearly than any direct interaction could. The case had been opened at a moment when such access would not draw attention, and closed again without altering the pattern of the room. That moment had not belonged to the night. It had occurred within the day, concealed by the continuity of movement and the certainty of expectation. Edmund stepped back slightly, allowing this understanding to settle into a coherent form. The man who had returned to the gallery had not needed to open the case himself. His role had been to observe and to confirm that the conditions required for such access remained unchanged. Once that confirmation had been made, the act itself could be carried out by someone whose presence within the gallery did not invite scrutiny. Someone whose access was expected. Blackwood turned his attention to those who remained within the room, now few in number, their positions defined by responsibility rather than movement. Among them were those who had been present before the exhibition had opened, those who had handled the case, and those whose duties allowed them to move within the space without interruption. Their actions had not been questioned. Their presence had not been observed in detail. They had been part of the structure itself. Edmund did not yet assign certainty to any one of them. The pattern he had uncovered did not yet resolve into a single name, but it had narrowed the field to those whose familiarity with the object and its enclosure made such an act possible without disruption. The theft, when considered in this way, did not depend on a single moment alone. It depended on preparation, on confirmation, and on execution that aligned with the expectations of the room so precisely that no part of it required to be concealed. To identify the one responsible, it would not be enough to follow the absence of the emerald. It would be necessary to follow the presence that had never been questioned. The movement of the investigation, once directed beyond the gallery itself, did not expand. It narrowed. Edmund did not require a large number of possibilities. The conditions that had allowed the substitution had already reduced what could be considered: access to the case, Familiarity with its mechanism and the ability to move within the gallery without interruption formed a boundary that excluded most who had been present. What remained was not a crowd. It was a small, defined group. Blackwood allowed the gallery to empty completely before shifting his attention away from its center. The display, now no longer the focus of observation, retained its form, the false emerald still resting within the case, preserving the appearance that had sustained the illusion throughout the day. It would remain there, for a time, as it continued to serve its purpose. Not as an object, but as a reference. Edmund moved through the space with measured steps, not examining what was visible, but considering what had occurred before the exhibition had opened. The preparation of the display had not been observed by the public, yet it had been essential to the structure that followed. The case had been installed, the emerald positioned, and the mechanism secured under conditions that allowed for careful control. Those conditions had not been repeated during the day, but they had been established within it. Blackwood directed his attention to those whose responsibilities extended into that preparation. The attendants, though present throughout the exhibition, did not interact with the mechanism beyond maintaining order. Their role had been to observe, not to handle. Their familiarity with the space did not extend to its construction. Others, however, had not been limited in this way. There were those who had been required to ensure that the object itself was properly presented. Those who understood not only its value, but its condition, its placement, and the manner in which it would be perceived under light. Their work did not end with installation. It extended into preservation. Edmund Blackwood did not seek their names immediately. He sought their function. The emerald, as it had been displayed, did not exist in isolation. Its appearance depended on preparation that ensured its surface, its positioning, and its interaction with light remained consistent. This preparation required handling, not at a distance, but directly, and with a degree of familiarity that allowed for precision without hesitation. Such familiarity could not be learned in a single moment. It required experience. Blackwood allowed his attention to settle upon this detail, tracing its implication through the structure of the exhibition. The one who had replaced the emerald had not done so through approximation. The substitution, though not identical in substance, had been exact in appearance. It had matched not only the form of the object, but its relation to the case, to the light, and to the expectations of those who observed it. This level of precision did not arise from observation alone. It arose from prior contact. Edmund moved toward the outer edge of the gallery, where the structure of the room gave way to the corridors that connected it to the rest of the building. The exhibition did not exist independently. It relied on spaces beyond it, on rooms where objects were prepared, examined, and, when necessary, restored. It was within these spaces that handling occurred without scrutiny. Blackwood paused not to observe, but to consider the sequence that connected those rooms to the gallery. The emerald had been brought from such a space into public view. It had been handled, secured, and presented in a manner that allowed no question of its authenticity. The one who had replaced it would have followed that same path, not as an intrusion, but as a continuation. Edmund did not yet need to identify the individual by name. The structure had already defined the role. It belonged to someone whose presence in both spaces required no explanation, whose movement between preparation and display was not observed as unusual, and whose contact with the object itself did not invite scrutiny. A restorer, or one who worked closely with such a function. Blackwood allowed this conclusion to remain without finality. It did not yet accuse, but it directed. The pattern that had begun within the gallery now extended beyond it, connecting the visible to the concealed, the observed to the assumed. The theft had not required force. It had required permission that no one had thought to question. Edmund turned slightly, his attention returning once more to the quiet structure of the museum as a whole. The gallery, now empty, no longer held the answer within itself. It had revealed the method, but not the hand that had carried it out. That hand, he understood, would not be found where attention had been directed. It would be found where attention had never been required. The conclusion, once formed, did not require haste. Edmund did not move immediately to confront what had been uncovered. The structure of the investigation had not yet reached its final point, and to act too soon would have reduced what could still be revealed. The one responsible had acted within a design that depended on precision, and such precision rarely ended with a single action alone. It continued. Blackwood allowed the museum to settle into its evening quiet, the movement that had defined the day replaced by a stillness that did not erase what had occurred, but preserved it. The gallery, now closed, remained unchanged in appearance, the false emerald still within its case, its presence continuing to sustain the illusion that had allowed the theft to pass unnoticed. This illusion, Edmund understood, could still be used. He did not remove the object. He did not announce the discovery beyond those already aware of it. Instead, he allowed the substitution to remain where it was, preserving the conditions under which the act had been completed. To alter them would have been to erase the final trace of the method, and with it, the opportunity to observe what might yet follow. The investigation at this stage did not depend on what had already been taken. It depended on what would be done next. Edmund Blackwood moved beyond the gallery, allowing his attention to follow the path that connected it to the inner structure of the museum. The corridors, quieter now, revealed more clearly the spaces that had remained concealed during the hours of the exhibition. These rooms, removed from public view, carried a different form of activity, one defined not by observation, but by preparation. It was within these spaces that the emerald had last been handled without witness. Blackwood did not seek to question those who worked within them, nor did he introduce suspicion where none had yet been expressed. Instead, he observed the pattern of movement that continued even after the exhibition had closed. Those whose responsibilities extended beyond the public hours did not cease their work entirely. They remained, their presence justified by routine, their actions unremarkable within the structure of the building. Among them, Edmund began to distinguish a familiarity that extended beyond function. There was one whose movement between the inner rooms and the gallery did not vary. His pace, his path, and the timing of his presence aligned with the preparation that had preceded the exhibition and with the conditions that had allowed the substitution to occur. He did not draw attention, nor did he alter his behavior in response to the quiet shift that had taken place within the museum. He continued as before. This continuity did not suggest innocence. It suggested confidence. Blackwood did not follow him directly. To do so would have introduced a change that might not yet be warranted. Instead, he allowed his attention to remain at a distance, observing the consistency of his movement, the absence of hesitation, and the manner in which his presence aligned with spaces that required both knowledge and access. The man did not behave as one concealing an act. He behaved as one who had completed it. Edmund allowed this observation to remain without conclusion, turning instead to the structure that surrounded it. The emerald, though no longer present, still defined the center of the investigation. Its absence, preserved through substitution, created a condition in which expectation could still be observed, and within that observation, responses could be measured. To act now would have ended that condition. To wait would extend it. Blackwood chose to wait. The night, though quiet, did not remain without movement. Those who worked within the museum continued their tasks, their actions subdued, their presence steady. Among them, the same figure moved without deviation, his path unchanged, his familiarity with the space evident in the absence of uncertainty. Edmund did not need to question him. Not yet. Instead, he allowed the conditions to remain as they were, preserving the illusion that had already served its purpose. If the emerald had been removed with the intention of remaining concealed, then its absence would require continuation. The one responsible would not yet consider the act complete. There would be a final step. Not within the gallery, but beyond it. Blackwood returned his attention briefly to the case, now distant, yet still central to the design. The false emerald remained in place, its presence unchanged, its function not yet exhausted. It continued to confirm what others believed to be true, and in doing so, It preserved the opportunity to observe what would follow. Edmund understood that the act of theft had not ended with removal. It extended into concealment. And within that concealment, the one responsible would reveal more through continuation than through the act itself. To find him, it would not be necessary to confront what had already been done. It would be necessary to observe what could not yet be left undone. The night did not conceal movement. It revealed it. Without the presence of visitors, the structure of the museum altered in a manner that did not change its form, but refined its visibility. The corridors, once shaped by the passage of many, now held only the movement of those whose presence was necessary. Each step, each pause, and each direction taken stood apart from the rest, no longer absorbed into a greater pattern, but defined by its own intention. Edmund remained within this quiet structure without disturbing it. He did not position himself where he could be seen, nor did he remove himself entirely from what unfolded. Instead, he chose a place from which the movement between the inner rooms and the gallery could be observed without interruption. From there, the path that had already drawn his attention could be followed once more, not as part of the day's repetition, but within the clarity of night. The man did not alter his behavior. He moved as he had before, his pace measured, his direction consistent, his presence aligned with the routines that had defined his role. There was no indication of urgency, no adjustment that might suggest awareness of observation. He continued as one whose actions required no concealment. This continuity did not weaken suspicion. It confirmed it. Blackwood allowed time to pass without interference, observing not only the man, but the structure within which he moved. The rooms beyond the gallery, though quiet, remained active in a subdued manner, their purpose shifting from preparation to preservation. Objects were secured, records were maintained, and the routines that sustained the museum extended into the night without interruption. Within these routines, Edmund introduced a single alteration. It was not visible. It did not disrupt. But it existed. The false emerald, which had remained within the display case, had been replaced once more. Not with the original, which had yet to be recovered, but with a replica that differed in a way that could not be perceived by sight alone. Its appearance remained exact, its position unchanged, and its presence consistent with expectation. Only its substance had been altered. This alteration, subtle and concealed, did not serve to deceive those who had not yet questioned the object. It served to reveal the one who would. Edmund Blackwood did not announce this change, nor did he alter the routines that surrounded it. The case remained closed, the gallery secured, and the structure of the museum preserved. To all who moved within it, nothing had changed. And yet, the condition had been set. The man continued his movement through the corridors, his path unchanged, his attention directed toward the tasks that defined his role. He did not deviate, nor did he hesitate, and for a time, his presence revealed nothing beyond what had already been observed. Then, gradually, it shifted. The change did not occur in direction. It occurred in timing. Where his movement had previously followed a consistent pattern, it now extended beyond it. He remained within certain spaces longer than required, his pauses no longer aligned precisely with the tasks he performed. These variations were slight, almost imperceptible, yet within the stillness of the night, they acquired a clarity that had not been present before. Blackwood did not move. He allowed the variation to continue. The man's path, though unchanged in its general form, began to include a deviation that had not been present in earlier observation. He approached the gallery not as part of routine, but with a purpose that did not align with the necessity of his duties. His pace remained measured, yet his direction carried with it an intention that extended beyond maintenance. Edmund remained where he was, his attention fixed upon the point at which the corridor gave way to the entrance of the gallery. The door, secured as it had been throughout the night, did not open immediately. The man paused before it, his movement still, his posture composed, as though considering not whether he could enter, but whether he should. Then, without hesitation, he did. The mechanism, concealed from view, responded to his action without resistance. The door opened, its movement controlled, its sound minimal. The man entered the gallery with the same measured calm that had defined his behavior throughout the night. His presence within the space neither hurried nor concealed. The room, though unchanged, now held a different purpose. The display case remained at its center, the false emerald still within, its appearance undisturbed. The light, reduced but sufficient, cast a steady illumination that preserved the clarity of the object, allowing it to be seen without distortion. The man approached. Not quickly, not cautiously, but with familiarity. Blackwood observed this without movement, allowing the final part of the pattern to unfold without interruption. The man reached the display case and paused, his gaze directed not at the object itself, but at the structure that contained it. His hand moved with precision, finding the concealed point of access without hesitation, his familiarity with the mechanism evident in the absence of adjustment. The case opened. The motion was controlled, practiced, and without error. The man reached within. For a moment, nothing changed. Then, as his hand closed around the object, the certainty that had defined his movement began to shift. It did not break. It faltered. The weight, expected and known, did not align with what he found. The difference, though slight, was sufficient to interrupt the continuity of his action, introducing a hesitation that had not existed before. Edmund Blackwood remained still. The trap had not been set to prevent the act. It had been set to reveal it. And now, within that single interruption, the final certainty began to form. The man did not withdraw immediately. He remained where he was, the object in his hand, his movement suspended between completion and recognition. The illusion that had sustained him had been altered, and within that alteration, his understanding no longer aligned with what he expected to find. For the first time, his action required thought. And in that thought, his role could no longer remain concealed. The interruption, though slight, was sufficient. It did not require movement to become visible. It existed within the pause itself, within the moment in which expectation no longer aligned with reality. The man remained where he stood, his hands still within the case, the object held without certainty, as though the act he had completed no longer corresponded to the outcome he had anticipated. Edmund did not approach immediately. He allowed the moment to extend, to define itself without interference, ensuring that what had been revealed could not return to concealment. The room remained quiet, its stillness no longer neutral, but attentive, as though the structure that had once concealed the act now served to contain it. Blackwood stepped forward only when the hesitation had fully formed. His movement was measured, without urgency, yet it carried a finality that did not require force. The distance between them was short, and within it, the difference between assumption and knowledge had already been resolved. The man did not turn at once, but his posture shifted, the certainty that had guided him replaced by an awareness that could no longer be ignored. Edmund Blackwood came to a stop at a distance that did not threaten, yet did not allow retreat. The display case remained open, its mechanism exposed only in function, not in form. The object, still held within the man's hand, no longer served its purpose, its altered weight having already broken the continuity upon which the act depended. The illusion, preserved throughout the day, had now been replaced by a condition that could not be sustained. Blackwood did not raise his voice. He did not accuse. Instead, he allowed the explanation to unfold within the space that remained between them, his attention directed not at the act itself, but at the structure that had made it possible. The man had not needed to force entry, nor to create distraction. His presence within the museum had granted him access without question, his familiarity with the case allowing him to engage its mechanism without hesitation. The substitution had not been a single act, but part of a sequence that had begun before the exhibition had opened and had continued through each day without interruption. Edmund spoke not of guilt, but of design. The repeated visits, precise in timing, had not been attempts to observe the emerald, but to confirm the conditions under which it could be replaced. The alignment of light and reflection had been used not to conceal the act, but to ensure that its result would be accepted without scrutiny. The object, once replaced, had remained within the case not to deceive indefinitely, but to delay recognition until the moment of removal no longer coincided with the moment of theft. Blackwood allowed each part of this structure to settle into place, not as accusation, but as understanding. The man had not acted alone. His role, though central, had been defined by confirmation and execution within the space he could move freely. The preparation, the creation of the replica, and the timing of the act had required knowledge that extended beyond a single individual, yet it was his access, his familiarity, and his confidence that had allowed the final step to be completed without interruption. Edmund did not ask for explanation. He did not require it. The pattern, once revealed, did not depend on admission to be understood. The man's stillness, his hesitation, and the manner in which his certainty had faltered spoke with greater clarity than any words might have provided. The object in his hand, no longer aligned with expectation, remained as evidence not of what had been taken, but of what had been attempted to be secured beyond the initial act. The theft had not ended with substitution. It had continued into concealment. And now, within this final moment, it had reached its conclusion. Blackwood extended his hand, not as a demand, but as a completion of what had already been established. The man did not resist. The object, no longer serving its purpose, was returned without force, its presence within Edmund's grasp restoring a balance that had been carefully disrupted. The case remained open. The room remained quiet. And within that stillness, the structure that had once concealed the act now revealed it entirely. Edmund Blackwood did not regard the moment as a resolution. He regarded it as confirmation. For the method, once understood, no longer required repetition. And the one who had relied upon it no longer possessed the certainty that had allowed it to succeed. The final resolution did not alter the structure of the museum in any visible way, and by the following morning the gallery appeared much as it had before the events of the previous day had unfolded. The display case remained at its center, its glass surface clear and undisturbed, and within it the emerald had been returned to its place. Its presence restored the quiet balance of the room, reflecting the light with the same measured clarity that had first drawn the attention of those who entered. Nothing suggested interruption, and nothing revealed what had taken place within the same space only hours before. The exhibition, though nearing its end, continued as intended, its final visitors moving through the gallery without hesitation. They approached the display, observed the emerald, and departed with the same quiet certainty that had guided them from the beginning. The object, once again present, required no verification, and the structure of the room resumed its familiar function, no longer concealing anything beyond what it openly presented. Edmund did not remain among them. His part in the matter no longer required his presence within the gallery, and what had been necessary to understand had already been resolved. The emerald had been recovered, the method by which it had been taken had been revealed, and the sequence that had allowed the act to pass unnoticed no longer retained its concealment. By all visible measures, the matter had reached its conclusion. And yet, for Edmund, the beginning had not lost its significance. He returned, in thought, to the letter that had first set the events in motion. It had not described the method, nor had it identified the individual responsible. It had offered no detail that could have prevented the act, and yet it had expressed a certainty that had proven entirely accurate. The theft would occur, it would take place within a defined period, and it would not be stopped before it had been completed. This certainty had not been an assumption. It had been knowledge. Blackwood considered the nature of that knowledge without attempting to resolve it too quickly. The letter had been restrained in its form, its language measured, its purpose limited to the statement it carried. It had not guided the investigation through instruction, nor had it sought to interfere with what would follow. Instead, it had ensured that attention would be directed toward the event, not before it occurred, but as it unfolded. Edmund did not conclude that the writer had been involved in the act itself, though he did not entirely dismiss that possibility. The precision of the letter suggested awareness that extended beyond what might be gathered through chance, yet its restraint suggested a distance that did not align with direct participation. It revealed the certainty of the event without revealing its structure, allowing it to proceed while ensuring that it would be understood. Such intention did not easily resolve into a single explanation. Blackwood allowed it to remain without one. The letter itself, now set aside, offered nothing further. Its surface held no hidden meaning, and its words, once read, did not change with reconsideration. It remained exactly what it had been from the moment it had arrived, a statement that had proven accurate without revealing its origin. Edmund did not regard this as an absence of resolution. He regarded it as a limit that did not diminish what had been achieved. The theft had been completed, but not allowed to remain concealed. The design behind it had been uncovered, the roles within it understood, and the object itself returned to its place without disruption to those who had never known it had been removed. What had been altered had been restored, and what had been hidden had been revealed. What remained extended beyond that structure. The museum returned to its ordinary function, its rooms no longer defined by the quiet precision that had once concealed the act. The exhibition concluded, and the emerald, no longer subject to attention beyond its display, resumed its place within a setting that no longer held any hidden design. And yet, for Edmund, the presence of the letter did not disappear with the resolution of the case. It remained, not as a question that demanded an answer, but as one that did not require one to retain its significance. The certainty it had provided had shaped the course of the investigation, and in doing so, it had fulfilled its purpose without revealing the mind that had formed it. Blackwood did not pursue it further, not because it could not be followed, but because it no longer belonged to the matter that had been resolved. Its origin remained separate, its intention complete, and its presence, though unexplained, did not alter what had been understood. The case had ended, not with complete knowledge, but with sufficient understanding. And beyond that understanding, there remained the quiet possibility that somewhere, beyond the structure that had contained the act, there existed someone who had observed it before it occurred and had chosen not to prevent it, but to ensure that it would be seen. That possibility did not disturb the conclusion. It extended beyond it. And in doing so, it left behind a final condition, one that did not belong to what had passed, but to what might yet follow.